of the things I love about having this YouTube channel is I'm starting to really get a sense for the people who watch it, and we're getting some really good comments on some of the videos. And a comment that came up a couple of weeks ago that I wanted to address directly is this question of what is success in poetry. Several times throughout the videos, I often talk about a successful poem, or maybe a poet who's successful at doing a particular thing, or maybe even a successful poet in general. And so I wanted to clarify maybe the different ways we could use the term success when it comes to the art of poetry. And I've broken this up into maybe 3 or 4 different types of success that we could talk about when we talk about poetry. But I'm interested in what you guys think too. Maybe there's some overlap here. So I think first of all, when we talk about success in general, maybe the lowest level of success we could talk about as sort of being a success that is directly related to getting some sort of reward for what you do. We might say, oh, do you have a successful career? And we might mean, do you make a lot of money from what you do? Or maybe even if it's not a lot of money, do you make enough money that that can be your career, or you can live on that? Now, successful poets, I'm afraid to say, are few and far between in this first category. Poetry is not big business. At times it has been. If we look back to, say, the 18-teens, 1820s, 1830s in London, for example, some of the late Romantic poets, think people like Lord Byron, did find a lot of monetary success with the publication of their poems. We have stories of, people lining up around the block at the booksellers to get the new Byron poem or to get the new Dickens novel. There is such a thing as literary success in this first regard, where you make money, people want to buy what you're making. These days, when we think about that kind of success, people lining up around the block, things selling out, we usually think more about the movies, or we might think about blockbuster novels, say the Harry Potter in the previous decade, or Dan Brown or John Grisham maybe back in the 90s. There are writers who find this first level of success. When I talk about success in poetry, I seldom mean that, though. Now, there's a second level of success where we could say, look, it's not primarily a success that's based on, do you make a lot of money from it, or do you get a lot of loot in return? It would be more like, have you successfully given the audience what the audience is asking for? Sometimes we might call this audience success, or even critical success. Did you, through your art, provide the readership, whether that's a snooty critic or whether that's, just the person on the street or anywhere in between, did you give the people what they were looking for? I've often used this level of success, or this meaning of success, in the videos I've made when I talked about Wordsworth kind of giving the people what they want in his Romantic poetry. I was kind of being tongue-in-cheek, but in another sense, I think there's a real way in which, especially an established writer, has created a market for the kind of things they do, right? If Steven Spielberg makes a movie, there are particular things we expect from that movie. Now, we can also say that maybe we don't like a movie that Spielberg made because we were expecting E.T. or Jurassic Park, but he gave us Schindler's List. Then again, Spielberg is such a masterful movie maker that Schindler's List then becomes so iconic, we start to expect maybe that kind of thing from a writer or artist. This happens, I think, a lot in poetry. We could even look at someone as big and important as Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote a lot of tragedies, comedies, and histories in the form of verse plays. If you were a Londoner in the mid-first decade of the 16th century, sorry, that's the 1600s, you might think, oh, the next thing Shakespeare writes will probably be another tragedy, comedy, or history that will be performed on the stage. And if you were, say, looking for that around about 1605, you would have been surprised to see that the next thing Shakespeare wrote was a lot of sonnets. You might have said, hey, wait a minute, I was looking for another play. Why is Shakespeare's next major work a bunch of sonnets? Now, you might have started reading those sonnets and said, oh, these are really good sonnets. And then started thinking, he didn't successfully give me what I was looking for, and yet I like these. And this leads us, I think, to a third type of success. The first two types, I think, really aren't very much based on the actual work of the artist. It's more what sells. It's not quite up to the artist what sells, what is going to be popular. Monetary success and popular success, we might call these first two, depend very little on the artist. Now, the artist can be canny. The artist can look around and say, hey, what's selling right now? I'll try and make something like that. But as we know, the market is fickle and the audience is fickle. And the great artist, even the pretty good artist, is able to create new expectations for art. And I think this is where we get into the third and I think most meaningful type of success. This type of success we might call success within the art form itself. Have you successfully made a good object within the art form that you're practicing? Have you made a good poem? Is the poem successfully well put together, self-contained, coherent, balanced, well-structured? Does it, and this is perhaps even a fourth type of success, but I want to talk about it here. Does it meet the requirements, not that the audience has, but that the tradition has? We might want to split this up into two types of success. We could say maybe there's success within the tradition you're working in. When Shakespeare writes his sonnets and publishes them in the mid-1600s, he's not giving people more plays, which maybe they want, but he is writing in a long tradition which stretches back hundreds of years, from England back through Italy to people like Petrarch and Dante. So when Shakespeare is writing his 150 plus sonnets, what he's doing is writing not the thing that the people and the public want, but he's writing within a tradition, and there are particular rules, expectations, strategies that he has to think about. Am I successfully measuring up to the tradition of the sonnet writer? Now, that is distinct and different from, is this a good sonnet? And yet the success in the internal nature of a made object is related to the tradition in which that object is made. And yet I think the highest type of success in any art, doesn't depend on a knowledge of the tradition in the reader in order to create a recognition of that success in that art. I'll try and say that a different way. There might be a literature professor who studied the history of the sonnet for years and years and years. If they pick up a really good sonnet by, say, John Keats, or Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, or Emma Lazarus, they're going to read it and be able to recognize both the qualities that the poem has on its own without relation to the tradition, but they're also going to see the resonances with and the way that that poem contributes to and is in conversation with the tradition. And yet any old reader, maybe who's never heard of sonnets before, who doesn't even know what a sonnet is, might pick up a poem by Emma Lazarus, say, The New Colossus. That sonnet that's etched on the base of the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your hungry, yearning to breathe free. They might read that and have no idea what a sonnet is, and yet be struck by the inherent beauty and balance and structure and longing and majesty of the poem. And I think that's the highest type of success, a success that is in the poem itself and not necessarily even in the tradition or in the expectations of the consumer. That's certainly not in the how much money did I get from it, but is in the art form itself. And so when I say success in poetry, I hope ultimately we will give our highest respect not to the money maker, not to the taste panderer, not even to the one who says, I want to write within a tradition. You could successfully write it within a tradition, but write only an okay poem. But to the poem that in and of itself, regardless of our previous knowledge of it, has the power to create in us taste, to create in us admiration, to create in us that same balance and resonance that resides in the poem itself. So, hopefully that's helped us think a little bit about the ways we can think about success in poetry. I want to focus, especially in this program, in this series of videos, on that final type of successful poem, but always in relation to the tradition, because tradition is a good guide to what's worked well. It's a good tutorial, it's a good tutor to how to create well-made things that are well-made in and of themselves.